welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Welcome to our March 2019 community chat. Joining me today are two newcomers to the community chat family. Liselle Yorke, who is originally from Trinidad and Tobago but currently lives in the US, is a communications specialist who has written extensively on technology for development. And Ian Mitchell, the managing director for Imagine Solutions, Inc., which is headquartered in St. Lucia and offers a broad range of website and mobile application-related services. Liselle and Ian, welcome to you both.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
Okay, so in this community chat, we'll be discussing two topics, which Ian and Liselle submitted. First, what will it take to go digital in the Caribbean, which Liselle will guide us through? And second, access to ICT projects for regional service providers, which Ian tabled for discussion. Okay, so Liselle, you're up to bat first. What will it take to go digital in the Caribbean? I'm intrigued by the topic, as I'm sure that quite a few people across the region might be thinking that we are already so digital. We have access to the latest technology, and generally our lives are so much better, certainly more comfortable than they were 20 or even 10 years ago. But your topic suggests that we still have a far way to go. What are your thoughts?
So, Michelle, thank you so much for having me. And so I think part of the reason why I broached this came from a selfish place. I will admit that. I remember having to go into the bank in Tobago last year while I was trying to do some stuff for my mother. And I kept wondering, why do I have to stand in the bank for an hour, to do anything? Whereas I could have done some of these things on a mobile phone, or there could have been some sort of platform within the bank to allow me to do it. And I'm not going to name the bank. We don't have to name names. But I think it's just a challenge we have across the region of how we can get technology to work better for us. I think that in pockets, there are systems in place. So you have, for example, mobile money being emergent in Haiti, and they've had several iterations of trying to make it work. You've had some developments in Jamaica, some in TNT, some new ones in the Bahamas. But overall, as a region, there hasn't been a lot of penetration. And a lot of times when we talk about going digital, we tend to mean mobile money. And so when I looked at the last report that the GSMA had done on mobile money in the region, there are just 3 markets with mobile money deployments in the Caribbean. Globally, it's 92. If you look at Latin America and the Caribbean as a whole, there's 17 deployments. So clearly, we are behind the curve. And, the question I have in terms of what would it take for us to go digital is looking at, do we have the right technology and infrastructure in place? Do we have the right enabling environment, which means the regulations, and also what needs to happen in terms of behavior change? What will it take for people to pick up their mobile phone to do any type of transaction or service instead of going into a business place or going into a bank? And so that's why I'm saying I don't think we are there yet, because these 3 things are things that we still need to crack.
Absolutely. So, Ian, especially since you work with websites and mobile apps, clearly you may have some unique insights and probably could add to what Liselle is saying. What has been your experience so far?
Yes, well, I mean, I quite agree with her perspective on this particular issue. The availability of digital services, you mentioned mobile money in particular, and I have some, exposure to that to some extent, at least digital currencies, digital wallets and that sort of thing, where, it isn't widely, and we still rely on a lot of, older means for conducting transactions and doing all of our business. You mentioned the banks and so on. Business is also conducted primarily through traditional means of you paying for things via checks and that sort of experience. And one of the primary issues surrounding that is the passage of legislation. I think that, we've had a number of pieces of legislation in draft or tabled in our parliament and not necessarily given a start date in many cases. I have clients coming to me wanting to develop applications, web applications or mobile applications, and to avoid, needing people to sign documents or so people to accept payments and that sort of thing, through using a credit card or using some of the digital means, and there are challenges in and around that. And of course, it's not that the technology is not available. Obviously, we've had the technology available here for a long time to receive credit card payments. It's just that my own company took about a year to get our own merchant account set up with a bank, and that's not because we weren't very actively pursuing it. It's because it just took that long. It's not a priority for them, right? There are other options nowadays popping up. You mentioned Trinidad. I know that there's a solution coming out of Trinidad which we are affiliated with. Again, I'm not going to mention any names, I guess, in this particular podcast. But there are options being made available these days. But again, we're still at a stage of infancy for a lot of these things.
Definitely. So I think one of the things that certainly came to mind as Liselle was talking is, as much as we probably think of going digital as probably focusing on mobile money, but I wonder whether or not we really have to think about it in terms of how we move a lot of the processes within the region to be more efficient and to embrace the digital space more. Because what you find, for example, is that we have, computers and laptops and all of the latest technology, but we're not necessarily using them and leveraging them to fully make processes more efficient and truly optimized. And I guess that is even probably one of the reasons why, mobile money and other forms of digital payments have not taken up to the extent that they could have, because we are, we're still okay with having to go to the bank, to be on this line for an hour and a half, or going to, a government office and to pay something or to get some transaction done. And you have to sit and wait, you have to take time off from work to get certain things done. So I do think that we may have to look at going digital in a lot broader perspective than just necessarily mobile money.
Oh, I agree with you absolutely. The whole idea of e-government is something that is very big, and I think it's going to have to be a push and a pull for us to get there. So at the end of the day, technology is just a tool, to meet the needs that people have. And so if we can build interest and build a clamor for people to want to be able to get their services in such a way, then there is greater incentive and to head in that direction. But at the same time, governments themselves also must realize that these are tools that they have to embrace to make their work lighter and more efficient. And I know, Michelle, in the past, you've had people come on your podcast to talk about e-government across the region and where things are from a CARICOM perspective. And it's good that people are talking about it. But I think the challenge we have in the region, and we're not the only ones, but it is really a challenge for us, is that we talk about things a lot.
Yes.
But then when it really gets to action, that's where we fall down. And I think it all comes down to the attitude that government has to technology. And so, in terms of stuff that I've written about in the past, there have been two interesting examples. I mean, both from the mobile money space, but it shows just what the thinking of the government is. So look at Kenya. So a lot of us have held Kenya up as a beacon in the ICT for D space because of M-Pesa, which is their system for money transfer. And the way that M-Pesa developed is that the government allowed innovation to lead the regulation. They were sort of like, okay, we want to see what you can do. You know, you're not going to be unregulated, but we're going to give you the space to develop and then develop the policies around it. You know, and then you have in India where there's a big thrust by the government for digital India, where it's like a government policy that everything is going to be digitized. So a big thing that they have started to do is trying to ensure that every adult has a bank account, because instead of going through the middlemen to give payments to people. So like if we look like in our context, we would have, say, like people's pensions and their widows and orphans payment, or their INS payments. Instead of that having to go through a middleman, the government mandated that everybody has to have a bank account, and then we're going to deposit the money directly into that bank account, and that's how you're going to get that money. And so that's a very heavy-handed approach, but it helped to move things forward as well. So I think you need both that push and pull for things to work. And I don't know if we're bold enough yet in the Caribbean to do that. And I think that's the challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you want to chime in before I have some points that I want to raise, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah, sure. I sort of chuckled a little bit at your last comment about being bold. You don't know how right you are, or maybe you do. I'm not sure. But the idea that, you know, the change management in our part of the world seems to be a nearly impossible task. Now, I think there are so many reasons behind that. Obviously, people tend to be in the public service. There's a reputation about not welcoming change. And we're talking about our government, like you've been stressing on, and e-government and so on. Change management is one of the major components, and it should be a major component of any kind of ICT project that is aimed at changing, improving the way we operate, because there is resistance to change. Obviously, people are comfortable within their particular daily routines. They see that learning a new way of doing something, even if it might be is obviously going to be for them. They think it's a bit of a challenge. They already have a negative attitude towards it. I mean, I've experienced it myself working in government on projects many times where we don't have that type of cooperation that you would expect to have. People are supposed to come to training activities, they don't show up, or they come late, or they don't participate very well. There's a lot going on, and because of the nature of the labor relationships within government, there's not that sort of that sense of, you know what, if I want to keep my job, I better evolve, right? There is not that perception. Now, on the flip side, our political cycles, I think, also are a problem, because within the first, in fact, let me go back. Within the last 2 years of any administration, they tend to focus on getting reelected. That's primarily what they focus on, not necessarily on making sure that the ministries under their portfolio operate in a particular way, right? They focus on trying to getting reelected, and then the year after elections, if the incumbent happens to win, they may be able to continue certain policies, but they're still in that election mode. So there's really, to be honest, a year and a half of actual time when we spent on trying to really improve the way we do things in our governments. Now, if governments change, then it's worse, right? So the idea that for example, that somebody like people like the three of us obviously are interested in moving ICT forward. You know, try to make our feelings felt within our local spheres. Try to pursue certain types of projects and activities that will help to improve the situation. We're not gonna have the type of backing that we really need to have to make things happen. People are not, people don't feel like they have to change. They don't feel like they have to change, in spite of all the talk and the lip service, as you mentioned. There's a lot of talk and lip service about it, but it never happens, because it's not what's needed for people to get real. Right? I think I don't want to sound political. Obviously, I'm not really concerned about which party, but I'm concerned about the fact that there doesn't seem to be that drive and that push, because it's not politically expedient to do so. That's really what I think where that is concerned. And so those persons who fall within the public service they don't really see a need for them to make any adjustments or changes either. I really don't see that.
Understood. Okay, so just one point going back to what you said, Liselle, that I wanted to raise, and I'm sure, Ian, you may have some perspective on that, is that, I mean, here we are in 2019, but I will say generally the Caribbean is still very much, a cash-based society where, you can, if you were building a house or like building, an apartment complex or something, you could, pay for all your supplies with huge wads of cash where, nobody will ask you where it comes from. But we still have this sense of needing the security of having, whether it's money under our bed or in our pocket, some sort of tangible representation of wealth. And I think we are still very uncomfortable in this day and age with just relying exclusively on a card, some plastic that you carry around in your pocket, or on, some online account where we just basically have to remember the access codes with in order to be able to get access to the funds that we think that we have, or it is stated that we have. So I wonder in terms, and as Liselle had indicated earlier on, just in terms of attitudes, that we're really not ready for going digital as it relates to digital payments, mobile money, etc.
Here's what I would say. I would go back to one of my earlier points, that technology is just a tool to meet a need. So you have to start with what's the need,
Mm-hmm.
And so is it, and I'll go back to the M-Pesa example, and I sound a bit obsessed with it, but it's one that I've been very fascinated about. So the way that M-Pesa even became successful is that the telecom operator noticed that people were bartering airtime credits. So that's where it began. People were bartering airtime credits as a way, to pay for stuff instead of using cash, so that's one. And then you also had in Kenya where there's a phenomenon that people in the rural areas to earn a living oftentimes have to go out to urban areas, and then they have to send money back.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day, the way you would send your money back is to give some money to the matatu driver, which in our world will be the maxi taxi driver who's going to your area, and hope and pray that the maxi taxi driver gets that money to whoever it's supposed to go to. So M-Pesa was filling a real need, and I think that's what it has to come down for us in the Caribbean, in each region or even across region. What are the pain points we have that digital can provide an easy solution for? And that is where you're going to get the acceptance from people. I mean, in India, even with the government doing all of that push, India is still more than 90% cash-based.
Mm-hmm.
These things take time, and I don't think we should expect any real change to happen overnight, but you have to start somewhere. And so the place you have to start is, what's the real need that people have? And is there a way that technology can fill that need in a way that makes sense for them?
Definitely. Okay, so we probably just need to wrap this up. Ian, any final thoughts on this topic? And Liselle, and then I'll let you go next.
Yes, I think again, in addition to what Liselle just said, in terms of the adoption of digital payments, I think credit card processing, etc. I think one of the problems that we face is that it's still cost prohibitive in our part of the world to be able to adopt it. There are lots of businesses, even some that appear well established in some forms. They refuse credit card payments, and I've come to realize that for them, the perspective, that percentage that they lose on every transaction is not worth it, and they figure since so many people still use cash, they prefer to not have credit card transactions. I think if it was a situation where even and let me transition to online payments, receiving monies via a website, for example, for a merchant. it is also quite cost prohibitive. Right. Using the traditional means, like we in our particular case, we pay $205 a month as a minimum, whether we have a transaction or not. Now, a lot of people may not necessarily be able to afford that sort of thing, right? So and that's just for the payment gateway provider, right? The bank has its own fees. So these are some of the issues in and around that. Now, I think there is business because people buy stuff online all the day. They buy from Amazon and eBay like crazy. We have so many small consumer goods coming into our country through these types of purchases. So people have the capacity to buy. They have credit cards or debit cards that they can use, but it's just very cost prohibitive for merchants on our end there to participate.
Okay. Liselle?
No, I'll just say, I mean, I think Ian hit the nail on the head that, everything comes down to cost, both for the consumer and the merchant, So that's a key thing that we would have to address. How do we get the cost down to sufficiently that it makes business sense for a merchant to participate in payment systems? How do you make it cost effective for a consumer as well? But, as Michelle, you had said before, going digital goes beyond payments and mobile money. So we also should be looking at what are the other areas in which we can use technology to make some difference in people's lives. So like, I loved, for example, the podcast you did yesterday with Mr. Swaby from Educal or
Edifocal,
I think.
Yeah.
So that's an example of a tool that is meeting a very clear need using technology. And so how many more of these exist in the Caribbean? How many more do we need to spotlight and nurture? Because it may not be our age group where we will see the breakthrough. It may be the younger folks. Because if you have the folks who go to Edufocal already embracing a digital lifestyle of e-learning and doing other things, then it becomes much easier for them to adopt and accept other types of technology.
Absolutely.
So I'll just leave it there.
Excellent. All right, we need to move on. So the next topic, access to ICT projects for regional service providers. So Ian, in addition to ICT Pulse, I also manage a platform called Project Calls where we collate project opportunities, not just ICT related projects, but those from across the Caribbean region. And one of the observations I've made in respect to these ICT-related projects in particular, besides them being relatively few, especially the large ones, I think I see what I consider to be somewhat onerous requirements in terms of the eligibility requirements, that is. What has been your experience and what is your concern?
Well, I happen to subscribe to your Project Calls, by the way.
Oh, okay.
So I'm quite aware, and I do look out for those ICT projects on Project Calls as part of my responsibility as I'm responsible for business development, managing my company. So I'm quite aware. And yes, you're right. There are a few advertised larger projects in the ICT sphere in particular. But that being said, I mean, this is a type of topic where it's easy to sort of just go off on a tangent and appear extremely biased and disgruntled with regards to ICT projects. Having been around the region myself, my company we do work for many regional institutions, from Central Bank to some CARICOM agencies, OECS, Caribbean Export. They're all our clients, and we do work for them. So we've been around a little bit, but what we found is that when it comes to getting projects within your own country, and I'm not speaking to myself, I'm speaking about myself because I have many colleagues around the region, part of regional groups of ICT professionals. We found that there is this perception that there is not the prerequisite skills and experience among local consultants to carry out a lot of the projects, especially the more complex, the ones that have larger budgets. there is that perception that we need to look outside of our local sphere, even outside of our local talent who live overseas. We tend to not do that. They go looking for these large companies. And I also found that many of these larger projects, and I think you even mentioned about owners' requirements. Some of the owners' requirements sometimes include a level of sales or revenue within your company that if you are a developing business, you probably don't have that sort of sales revenue as well. So you get excluded from eligibility based on that. Even if you try to partner with another company, sometimes the sales requirements are so onerous that you might as well have been an international conglomerate before you try to bid. So you have those particular issues, and of course some of the other issues. One of the other things that I have a little bit of a pet peeve about is the key expert requirements, where they combine some experience and skills which are nearly impossible to find in one person. So they ask for one key expert in some cases, or the lead key expert has to have some types of experience that is unusual. So there was an example where there's a key expert requirement for a regional project where the individual needed to have 10 years experience in forestry management or something like that, along with similar qualifications like master's or doctorate level in ICT. Right? So you're finding like, where do they come up with these things? Why don't they ask for two people to be key experts on such a project? Why does it have to be an individual? So these are some of the issues that I've seen.
Okay. All right, Liz, I'll jump in first, and then of course I'll add my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, this was an interesting topic for me because I don't work in the region. It was very insightful, but I would say that it is not unheard of. So a lot of the work that I've done in the tech for D space and the organizations I've been involved with has always been, largely in Africa and to some extent in Asia, and it's the same challenge there. It was the same challenge there of locals with clear skills being overlooked, for projects and people gravitating towards these big names because they thought the big names brought a certain amount of heft that didn't occur. And it has to be, at some point you have to have people who are very intentional in trying to build a different narrative for the tech providers. So you have this thing, the Silicon Savannah, which is what that Nairobi is now seen as, and that didn't happen overnight. It had to take local folks as well as bigger companies being more intentional about hiring in the region and showing that you have folks within the region, who could deliver, that help to change that narrative as well. And so I guess more than a statement, I have a question, for Ian around the partnerings that you talk about, that where they have these seemingly, onerous requirements. Are the partnerships you're trying to build also with companies within the region, or are they the larger players outside of the region? Because sometimes you unfortunately need that validation before your own would take you seriously.
Yeah, I understand the point that you're making, and what we've tried to do mostly is to partner with persons within our own space, and the reason being that I tend to have this at least my own view and my own experience is that this idea that foreign means better or foreign equals better, I think is a problem that needs to be overcome. However, I will accept that there are scenarios and there are projects where we do not have the prerequisite skills, or we do not have a reasonable level of experience to satisfy particularly those persons who are funding these projects, who may not necessarily be locally funded. So they are going to say, listen, we need we need persons of a particular background or a particular level of experience. We may not necessarily have those here. And in such cases, I have no qualms with the idea that you have to look outside. But what I think is that it should be a requirement that these skills somehow get transferred, right, to local service providers to give them a chance to grow. We must also not think that in every case, right, that we don't have the skills here. Now, I know maybe I'm being a bit. I don't want to exaggerate too much. I don't want to seem too extreme in my discussion, but it does appear. It does appear that me being a former president of the ICT Association and having had lots and lots of discussions with a lot of service providers here, it appears that a lot of them get work in other countries for projects that they can't get here. My company in particular, we import. Well, we are exporters. We are net exporters by maybe about 70% of our revenue comes from foreign sources, right? For projects that in many cases were previously, given to European companies or American companies or Canadian companies that outright failed, and we end up getting sort of like the scraps remaining to get these things working. So
yeah.
So that's what my issue is where that is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, because it's a very hard nut to crack. So is it an awareness issue more than anything else? That because if you are repeatedly being brought in to sort of clean up after these foreign companies have not delivered on the job, you would think that by the fifth time you're called in to do that, people will say, let's just go straight to Ian. There's no need, to call in a foreign company. And I'm trying to figure out, well, why isn't that switch clicking in somebody's head?
Well, I can appreciate what you're saying there, that you would think that the repetition or the references would be made at that point in time. But what we found is that once we start to work with one of these organizations, they just continue to work with us. So we continue to get revenue from those sources. But for us to now move on and to get okay, here's an example. We were bidding for a particular contract for a company that has regional ownership. Let's put it that way, okay? But they required particular references, especially around the area of e-commerce and other things. One of our major current clients, who continues to do work with us, even now we're working on multiple projects at once. Their policies do not allow them to make the kind of references that we needed. So they were only willing to say certain things, only willing to answer questions in a particular way, and so we had this long delay in even getting back references from them. Now, I mean, I can't be upset about that or blame them for that. I guess their policies are what they are, and obviously they believe in what we're doing because they continue to hire us repeatedly to do work. So it's just a scenario where the references don't necessarily just translate into additional work. But it seems like we basically need to crack each shell, like you call it, individually. That's what we have to do. We have to get in, do some good work, and then things work out from there with these particular agencies. But that's just the way it is right now. But I'm particularly concerned though, still, about the perception within among, let's say, for example, the largest provider of project opportunities is necessarily the government, right? The government provides the most project opportunities just by the very nature. And so, if you expect to really do well within your own, really build up to that level of local, where local revenue is significant, you have to get work from the government. Now, there seems to be, with each successive government, again, a perception that they cannot get the types of skills locally that they need to get. I know we have misrepresentation in our industry as well. So you do have persons who claim to be able to do things that they cannot do. right? So I accept that. It's just that it is not just local companies that do this.
With respect to the issue that we're discussing, at least one of my observations has been based, and you did hit the nail on the head, Ian, in terms of the specifications that sometimes are being asked for when you're looking at these tender documents. And clearly, based on the types of experience and so on that the bidders are required to have, what you may find is that we in the region might still, our resume may not be as impressive. And I think, certainly my observation, and it started from after the global financial crisis, over 10 years ago, is that I find that the sort of tenders and project space has become very, very competitive. Entities that you would not have expected to be bidding on projects, or projects at a certain size, that, everything is now fair game. And so some of these larger companies that would not necessarily have looked at, let's say, a $100,000 project or $50,000 project in the Caribbean, are doing so now. And therefore, they will, once they put their resumes forward, it can look quite impressive based against the requirements that have been specified. But what you then find, of course, is that they may have, at least on paper, the capability, but often they are subcontracting the work either to external parties or giving it to their most junior staff members. And what you then find is that at the end of the day, whatever solution or recommendations that they've made are essentially unworkable. And then, you and others similar to you get trotted in to come and try and clean up the mess or make the situation a bit more salvageable. But I think that might be a big contention. And as you also said, the whole issue of a lot of this money, especially on some of these large projects, is coming from external sources, so whether donor funds and the like, and many of them require that at least that their member countries are able to bid. People from their member countries are also able to bid. So there are limited restrictions in terms of who can actually bid for the project. So you may have things like that are sadly affecting the extent to which our locals, when I say locals within the region, local consultants, contractors, etc., are being selected for projects.
May I just piggyback on that and just ask a question in terms of the bids? If we're saying that the government is, usually the largest employer in terms of these types of consultancies, do they have policies in place that say, you need to have, at least one local provider as part of your bid? I mean, are those policies in place? Because if they're not, then it leaves you out in the cold. But if they have those policies in place and it's not something that can change from government to government, then, there's greater incentive, for people to find a local provider to bring on board, and then that helps to move you up the chain. So, Ian, I don't know if those policies are in place.
I wouldn't say that there's a policy to that effect. I will say that perhaps there may be cases where individual officials may decide to take that approach, depending on the type of scenario involved. I don't know that there is necessarily a policy surrounding that. Of course, which leaves things open to interpretation of the particular decision maker. They may decide that, I think we need to make sure we have the skills transferred, or that some local company also benefits from this project, right? But that is not necessarily an established policy.
Also,
so things are still left open.
Sorry, I just wanted to say also, Liselle, just what I've found is that, as Ian says, it may not be an established policy, and the times when they may specify it, you may find that it's certainly not the tech person who is going to be the local concern. It may be actually like a legal person. They might require, if the project requires legal skills, they might bring on a lawyer, because I guess that may be something that tends to be very localized in terms of the knowledge that might be required.
Yeah, that is true. That is very true.
And is that something that we can advocate for? I mean, it may not start at the tech providers level, but is that even a discussion, say, at the CTU? Because we're talking about this whole idea of having, the CARICOM single ICT space. If you're pushing for that, then you have to make sure you have the talent.
Mm-hmm. And that the talent develops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I visited Taiwan, I think in 2012, it was. And one of the things I thought that's very interesting about Taiwan is that they invest heavily in research and development. They have an entire institution, it's called E3, where they essentially develop ideas. So they hire all sorts of educated persons, PhDs, master's degrees, scientists, to just play with technology. And, out of that, they develop marketable products. Then they either look for established local companies who can market and produce those things, or they create new companies to market and produce those things. I've also seen in other examples in other Asian countries, like Singapore, for example, where they decide that there is a need, that let's say government has a particular need, e-government, for example. They will start out by developing agencies responsible for come up solutions to those particular needs, help them to grow, and transform them into independent companies, which eventually can go out and provide the services externally. So they invest in their own. I think it's important that we take a page from that. And we don't even have to do as much work as some of these other companies because the roadmaps have been well documented. So for a company like mine, for example, we know about the Estonia model. We know about the UK model. We've studied these things. We have contact with persons involved in those things. So it's not like we have to start figuring this out from scratch. And so I find that what's important is simply a shift in the perception that we do not have the capacity. They need to sit down and really have discussions with local companies and see where we can go, right? Because I all I like to say is listen, what are they afraid of? That we make mistakes? If that's what they fear, then they have a shock of their lives to realize that large companies get hacked.
Mm-hmm.
Large companies make mistakes, and they'll also have the shock of their lives to learn that even though we make mistakes, the finances still circulate within our economies.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe and you know what, I have what they call some people like to use that phrase that some of the foreign companies they have no skin in the game. I think that's a Trinidadian phrase, right?
Well,
it's like an American phrase, but it's all over. Everybody says it now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So they essentially, they can come in here. If it works out, fine. If it doesn't work out, fine. But with the local companies, we have our reputation at stake. And we're trying to we right here, and if it doesn't work, we're gonna be criticized right here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's a bit misplaced to think that it is too dangerous or too risky to invest in the development of our local companies. It's a bit misplaced, right? Because even if that money is spent and there are issues, the money is still spent locally, and you have employment. You have tax revenue, corporate tax revenue, income tax revenue, personal income tax revenue, value-added tax revenue, spending within businesses, people employed, more health insurance, more uniforms purchased. It's all a part of that investment you make in your local company and within your own country. And I can extend that to the region. I'm not even concerned so much that it has to be, let's say, a St. Lucian company in St. Lucia. All right. I think if we are one region, then we can look at trying to keep this project within our region as long as the talent is, So that's really what I'm seeing.
Yeah, which is why I asked the question about what is happening at the CARICOM level, because this is not just a question of local firms getting business. It's about Caribbean development, and what sort of sustainable development do you need to have in place to ensure that the region can be successful. And this is just key to it, having the local talent in place and nurtured.
Absolutely. I mean, Ian, what you're talking about, and it's something that at least I'm beginning to advocate for, is I think we talk about like national ICT policies, but oftentimes that gets us restricted or limited to like infrastructure, whether or not you get to have affordable rates and so on. But what I think you're focusing on is innovation. And, whether or not I think from a policy perspective, whether or not countries have innovation policies, which is what I think like Taiwan, Singapore, and all of these countries have, whereby they are looking at, for example, they may have a need for a specific product, or maybe not even a product. They may just say, listen, we are having an issue here and we would like, locals to bid on this project. And it's an innovation exercise whereby, you get some seed money, for example, and you have, entities bid for or submit proposals as to how they would resolve this issue. And that helps to nurture your talent and help it to grow and to develop, in addition to ultimately developing viable products, which probably could be shared regionally, internationally, because, a country has decided to be the test case for it. And I guess we'll see what happens. It's something that certainly I think could also happen on the regional level as well, especially based on my discussion with Jennifer Britton of CARICOM last year on the single ICT space, where one needs to be talking more about the digital economy and beginning to mobilize that and to get us all thinking in that way. So I think hopefully these are the sorts of suggestions and initiatives that probably need to be implemented to move us all forward.
And I'll just add, two thoughts, and a lot of my examples will come from African business where I've been focused. But I think they are good places, to look at. One of the things that intrigued me last year, and I'm going to keep an eye on, is that Sierra Leone appointed its first chief innovation officer, who reports directly to the president. And I found it very intriguing and a very bold move. Mm-hmm. And obviously, it's only been a few months, so we'll have to see what comes out of that. But to me, it shows a different way of thinking, the idea that innovation needs to be a core part of your economic development, and that you're actually going to have one person to sit and think strategically about how it should be used across the entire country, whether it's with your public or your private sector. So I think there are examples that we can look to as we in the Caribbean look to see how we can develop or in innovation into our economic development. Apart from the Taiwanese and folks in Singapore, you could look at Rwanda, which is trying to make itself, the tech hub of Africa, and other places, to see what are other people doing, with economies that may be as challenged as ours, and seeing how they are trying, to leapfrog into a different path.
Absolutely. Well, Ian, this was your topic. I'll just let you have 2 seconds to wrap up, and then we'll draw this whole community chat to a close. So over to you.
Yeah, I'll wrap up with something that you actually brought up a while ago, which is the idea of developing our ICT assets. We tend to not truly understand the value, even in our banking system and financial systems, tend to not to understand the value of the intellectual property created in the ICT software development sphere, right? And because we have not had the opportunity to truly invest in developing real full-scale ICT web products, for example, we really don't have anything of significant value as an ICT product. And our governments can quickly change that if they decide to allow us to develop the tools that are needed for them to go digital, to really implement e-government. Because now we can develop something in one island, and we can bring it to several other islands, because it is similar economic systems that we follow. So So I don't think they're really understanding that we're creating assets and we're creating intellectual property, right, of significant value. I don't think they're really truly understanding that, and I think that if that perception of not being able to really trust in our local service providers, if that is lifted, and we're allowed to make the mistakes that we need to make to get to the point that we need to get to, I think that in maybe within 5 to 10 years from now, we'll have a completely different discussion on how we are going digital in the region. I think we'd go much further because there are a lot of elements of small businesses that are trying to elevate themselves now to provide services, products and services that originate from our region. So I just hope that perhaps this discussion can get somewhere. The right people can hear what we're saying, and we can turn things around.
Absolutely. So, folks, I think we better bring it to a close. This has been a very stimulating discussion, and I think we can go on and on. I even have a few points that I want to raise based on what Ian said, but I think we better leave it for another time. So, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the community chat. Liselle, it's great having you and great to reconnect to you.
I know.
So, because we have known each other for so long. But, certainly I hope that you will take a closer look at what's happening in the region and share with us the perspective. I'm quite intrigued and certainly will be doing my own research on some of the initiatives that you've mentioned. I mean, in Africa, because yes, I know of M-Pesa and I know of Silicon Savannah, but I wasn't aware of the Chief Innovation Officer being appointed in Sierra Leone. And I think I knew that Rwanda was taking a more aggressive approach to ICT, but I really haven't been paying that much attention specifically to what's going on the ground there. And probably, as you rightfully say, there might be lessons that we can learn.
So, Michelle, thank you for having me. As you said, it's wonderful to reconnect. It's we have a long history together going back to UE, so good to reconnect. And I'm glad that I've had a chance to talk about the issues that are happening in my region and bringing perspective from elsewhere. So thanks for having me, and wonderful to chat with Ian as well.
Right. Ian, thanks again, because I guess we do go back as well. And I'm glad, though, to know that Imagine is doing well and getting lots of projects and recognition across the region, because I know that it can be tough for a small business in a small country to really get some regional attention and to be recognized and appreciated for doing good work. So thank you so much for bringing up the topic that you shared with us and really to highlight the challenges that at least tech businesses, those that are doing, contracting and consulting work, are experiencing.
Yes, it was indeed a pleasure to be part of this discussion and to also learn what is happening in other parts of the world. Thanks to this, I think it really is an apt comparison to make, with even though they are probably obviously larger populations, but in terms of the approaches that they're taking, innovative ways that they're trying to solve their problems, I think an apt comparison can be made. And one of the things that I take from it is political will that seems to exist in some of these countries based on what is being said. That says a lot about what we need to do in our region to get things moving. So I'm very happy to have had this discussion with the two of you, and we can do this again sometime.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.